Gender identity in the past has raised a lot of controversy, but in the most recent years, there have been strides made across the world in also known as GNC. A GNC individual is someone who does not conform to their gender or any gender. Oftentimes, someone who is gender nonconforming may also be a part of the LGBTQ community, but this is not always true. In this podcast, Mary Armstrong will elaborate on the ways in which GNC is present in society. In addition, Chris Morzier will provide some of his experience being a trans GNC athlete. And to end this podcast, Dennis will analyze the ways in which family plays a role on GNC individuals. Gender identity in the past has raised a lot of controversy, but in the most recent years, there have been strides made across the world in efforts to support all gender. However, there is always more that can be done. I am here with Mary Armstrong, Professor of Women and Gender Studies at Lafayette College. So, Professor Armstrong, as you may know, according to the ACLU, gender nonconformity used to be thought of as gender dysphoria, a mental health illness. Individuals who wish to transition needed a doctor to sign a note stating that without this surgery, they would not be able to live a healthy life. What are your thoughts on this?
Historically, it has been very common to classify persons who deviate from any enforced social identity as sick. This pathologizing of GNC individuals and others has been a way to control and authorize correction of characteristics that don't conform to the sex-gender binary. GNC individuals have often been subjected to diagnosis and treatment that they have neither wanted nor deserved. These kinds of negative diagnoses are still often needed by gender nonconforming people to access the care they need if they wish to evenly and partially transition. There is a sad irony in the fact that while there is more acceptance of GNC people overall, they are more visible in this culture. The links between sickness and trans identity are kept alive because trans people frequently rely on the model of illness to get their transitioning needs met. And of course, this is a class issue as well because economic disadvantages shapes everyone's relationship to the healthcare system.
That's so great that so many students over the years are being exposed to the different forms of identity and that GNC is being accepted and supported on an institutional level. I know my school focused on making sure that everyone is aware of the difference between sex and gender and would often hold panels in which students were able to ask questions. With that being said, are there any instances in which gender nonconformity is not accepted enough? And what do you think must happen in order for gender nonconformity to be completely accepted?
I worry that trans identities are often seen for their entertainment value. Trans people are often understood as cultural figures of fun or of passing interest. In reality, trans people are subject to incredible danger, disadvantages, prejudice, and bias. Trans visibility is not trans reality, and we have a long way to go in creating a world in which GNC, trans, and queer people are not only safe but celebrated for all they add to our communities.
I agree. Oftentimes, trans identities are often seen for their entertainment value. When I think about my first time hearing about trans individuals, I think of news reports or magazines in a grocery store in which a trans individual was being shown off in a passing way of interest. Trans and other GNC individuals deserve to not only be accepted, but praised for their contribution to our community, just like everyone else. Thank you for sharing, Professor Armstrong. We will now hear from Chris Morzier on his experiences being a trans athlete, specifically what gender means to him and the types of disadvantages he has faced.
Hi, I'm here with Chris Morzier, the first transgender man to compete for Team USA in a sport. Chris was always an athlete growing up, but she was not always secure with her position in society, which caused her to be thrown out of her competition to some degree. When Chris realized what would make him feel as if he really fit in, he knew that even without being sure of what the results may have been on his athletic competitiveness, the right thing for him to do was to make the transition from female to male. Since then, he has been a huge figurehead for the transgender community, and we are lucky enough to have him here with us today to give some input on his experience in growing up and making the transition, as well as how that has affected him up to this point in his life. So Chris, tell me, what were your thoughts on moving to competition as a male instead of a female?
Other than the finishing placements, I didn't expect or think about some of the things about races, like challenging areas. I was caught off guard during my Ironman race when I went to the changing area and it was an open room. It took a little extra thinking to navigate that experience. Now I know that being in that situation is a possibility, but I wasn't ready for it then.
I could imagine that transition was difficult in every aspect. Would you mind speaking to whether you feel as if your gender since the transition has had a positive or negative effect on you as an athlete and a person?
Competing as a woman, I thought about gender all the time, to a point where it inferred with my ability to be successful because I didn't feel comfortable at races. Now I feel more able to focus and gender doesn't come up as much. When I got third place male overall in the Mother's Day duathlon, 6.2 mile run, 27 mile bike, and 3.1 mile run, no one else said anything about the gender or the fact that I'm trans. Walking away with my trophy, I had a moment where it became clear that gender doesn't need to be a limiter in my ability to compete. It was a great moment.
Well, I have one more question for you, Chris. The media sensationalizes gender nonconformity in many cases. Being that you're such a familiar name, in coming out as trans, what were people's reactions and how did that affect you?
Well, when I was younger, I always imagined myself to grow up to be a man with six-pack muscles, and when I walked by a mirror and saw a girl reflected, it threw me off. Being in a skin that feels natural to me has affected me in an extremely positive way. And as for the reaction that I got, overwhelming letters came pouring in from kids who said that I had renewed their confidence and that thanks to having someone like them to look up to, they wanted to compete and try again. I wondered what if I had had a trans role model in my life at that age, someone to look up to, how different things could have been. It makes me happy that I can influence young people who are struggling like this and help make our community more present and heard throughout the world.
Thank you, Chris. Really great thing that you're doing here. Now I'm going to hand it over to Dennis to talk to gender nonconformity in parenting.
Now that gender awareness is moving into the mainstream realm, the subject of conversation is now shifting to that of child raising and overall how subjecting children to this style of nonconformity is going to affect them as they grow into adults. Many parents have decided that they want their children to be aware of the gender binary that surrounds mainstream society. The techniques they use to incorporate this are rather astonishing. For example, many trans men and masculine females go by the term of Baba as an alternative to mom or dad. As a parent attempting to raise a gender nonconforming child, one can only imagine how aware you have to be to avoid all the subliminal messages and gender influences that surround children. In a popular BuzzFeed video, a couple shared their experiences raising a child as gender nonconforming parents. Some quick background on the parents: their names are Michelle and Dashiell, and they married in 2013. In 2014, Michelle became pregnant via a donor and are now happily raising their son Atticus.
He's taking in kind of kid media. He has this great book that's like just pictures and words, but when you open it up, it's like a picture of a girl and a picture of a boy, and it's like girl, boy. I'm just like, child, child. This is where he starts learning like what things are, and so I hate the idea that he's getting imprinted on him. People who look like this are boys, and people who look like that are girls. And even something that's like progressive, like Sesame Street. All the monsters are boys unless they have like a bow in their hair and a sparkly necklace on. Like, why is Old MacDonald like a guy? Why couldn't it be the lesbian farmer?
It's everywhere. I mean, it is. It's everywhere. I think those are things that we are probably more aware of than most people anyway, but with him, we're probably really sensitive to it.
Sometimes the best thing to do feels like to be constantly challenging, and then sometimes it's almost just to ignore gender completely.
Obviously, both Dashiell and Michelle are going through a lot to shield their son from the traditional gender binary. Raising their child in such a way is indeed an arduous task. However, being that the parents are both proud and avid nonconformists, they hope to pay it forward by giving their son a new lens to look through as he grows up in a gendered world. This has been Elijah, Ryana, and Dennis on gender nonconformity. Thank you for listening.